highlights, clarifies what it means to be neighborly, and answers the question, who is my neighbor? Verse 30 says, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and what happened? He fell among thieves. He was robbed. He was left half dead. And as he was there dying, a priest and a religious leader, a priest and a Levite, came by, and they passed by on the other side. One completely ignored him. The other one got curious, looked over, and went on the other side. They probably were just coming back from serving in the temple in Jerusalem, and to touch someone who was half dead, that meant they'd have to go through a bunch of ceremonies to be ceremonially clean, so they could serve again in the temple, and it was too much for them to do, and it was inconvenient, so they passed on by, didn't care. But a certain Samaritan, verse 33, a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. There's that word again. Compassion. Had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. And so here you've got a man who's left half dead on the road. It's very likely he was a Jew. His own people passed him by, the religious leaders at that, walked by him, and a Samaritan, one who was despised by the Jews, stopped, took pity on the man, had compassion for him. Compassion moved him to take action, because compassion always does that. It always moves a person to take action. Compassion moved him to take action. He spent his resources, cared for the man, put him in his own beast of burden, took him to an inn, even told the innkeeper, if you spend more for his care, I'll repay you when I come back through. Did he go the extra mile? Yeah. Didn't just say, here's a Band-Aid, all the best. He did what needed to be done to get the man back on his feet, did he not? Sure. He did all that he could to help him. To be a neighbor. So Jesus asked the question, so who is the neighbor? The two that said they were religious, or the one who actually did something good for someone in need? It was the Samaritan. And the lawyer couldn't even say Samaritan. He just said the one that helped him. That one. And so neighbor, the neighbor, to be neighborly. To be a neighbor or a neighbor just simply means a near one. Our neighbors are all of those who stand in need, are they not? Whether they need help physically or whether they need help spiritually. Every person on planet Earth is our neighbor, irrespective of the color, nationality, irrespective of the religious affiliation, political party. It doesn't matter. Everyone is our neighbor, especially those who need Jesus. We need to come near and help individuals come to know Jesus. So this was the lesson of the parable. The Samaritan took care of the Jew, the one who the Jews didn't treat the Samaritans well at all. And do you think the Samaritan took that into consideration? If he had taken into consideration, what would he have done? Would have moseyed on by, right? Would have just kept on going. But he didn't take that into consideration. You know, a lot of times when we poise to help somebody, and we consider who may need the assistance, sometimes we may ponder how that person may have treated us, or what they may have said to us, or how they've treated a family member. And because they may not have treated us well, or a family member, or our spouse, or our children, but they need help, we'll justify our not helping because of the way they've treated our family member or even ourselves. The Samaritan could have easily justified himself and moved on, but he didn't. He stopped and helped someone who, if were given a chance, would have spat on him because he was a Samaritan. But he helped him nonetheless. The lesson of the Good Samaritan is one of impartial kindness. Irrespective of how a person treats you, irrespective of what they may have said to your spouse or your children, whatever theological tenets they hold to, whether they have a conservative worship experience or a liberal one. Everyone is our neighbor, and each one needs to be treated as we would want to be treated. That's the golden rule, is it not? That's the golden rule. Jesus taught here about a man who gave a man a hand up. He didn't give him a hand out. He gave him a hand up. He left him there, he gave him a good head start, and the guy was to kind of tend for himself afterwards. But he gave him a hand up, not necessarily a hand out. And we just need to talk a little bit about that when we're talking about helping others. It's just as wrong for a person, through bad choices they make, that put themselves in a needy position, thus becoming a burden on others to help them, as it is simply to neglect to help the same person in need. Should I say that again? I'm going to say that again. Actually, I'll read it again. I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it, and it was pretty powerful. It was just coming to me. It's just as wrong for a person, through the bad choices they make, that put them in a needy position to expect help from others and to be a burden to others, as it is to neglect to help the same person in need. So the lesson here is treat others as you would want to be treated, right? Do not do to others what you yourself dislike. Jesus didn't deal with the negative here, he dealt with the positive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And he certainly didn't teach treat others as they treat you. It's easy to treat someone well when they've treated you well, is it not? Yeah, it's easy for us to do that. And it's easy to treat someone poorly if they've treated us poorly. But Jesus said treat others as you would want to be treated. We love God as much as the person we like the least. A couple of Bible verses here. Someone has 1 John 4 verse 20. 1 John 4 verse 20, right over here. Fabulous. Turn with me to 1 John. We'll look at a couple of verses over there before we get to 1 John 4:20. Look at 1 John 2:4. Notice what the writer says. He says, he that saith, I know him, that is, I know God, and keeps not his commandments. And what are the commandments? To love God with all, to summarize it, to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He that says, I know him, but does not do this, does not love God supremely, and does not love his neighbor as himself, is a what? Liar. And the truth is not in him. We only love God as much as the person we love the least. Look at 1 John 4 and verse 12. And then we'll come to verse 20. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwells in us, and his love is perfected in us. And so the love that we express to others comes from who? God. And it reveals that God's love is abiding and dwelling in our hearts, you see. Okay, 1 John 4 and verse 20.
If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, how can he love God, whom he hath not seen?
That's a powerful verse, isn't it? It speaks for itself. Our default setting is it's easy to dismiss a person who irritates us. It's easy to loathe a person who mistreats us. And so the need here is for not an external change, but a heart transformation. And that comes, sometimes nearly every day, doesn't it? Someone challenges you, tests you, rubs you up the wrong way. It's not good enough to say, well, I'll be at church on Sabbath, or I'm paying a faithful tithe, or I'll treat them well next week. At that very moment, we are called upon to say, Lord, change my heart, because right now I'm not liking this person very much. Now, you don't have to like the way they've treated you. If it's treated you, you don't have to like that. But we're called to love that person, respect that person, see in them the potential as if they've given their lives to Jesus, what they could become transformed by Jesus. All right, we go to Tuesday's lesson, loving service. We're directed to the story or the parable in Matthew chapter 25 of the sheep and the goats. Loving service. Many people wish to serve God, someone said, but only in an advisory capacity. And I hope that that's not our experience. They want to tell God what needs to be done. Why don't you do this and do that, rather than doing what God has asked us to do. And in Matthew chapter 25, we're told, and we're shared, it's been told us here, and Jesus shares with us that in essence we are his hands and his feet and his mouths. You've heard it before. We're his ambassadors, his missionaries, the ones who care for others while Jesus is not here. We are his hands and his feet. And in this particular story, Jesus, well, let's look at this here, verse 31. Jesus is talking about his return and the judgment, and he's talking about the goats and the sheep being separated. And the king says to those on his right hand, which are the sheep, "Come, inherit the kingdom prepared for you." Verse 35, why? "Because I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me." And the righteous answered and said, "Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? Or a stranger," etc. And verse 40, "The king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, you've done it unto me." Unto me. And this wouldn't just be talking about those, the brethren that follow Jesus or are professed Christians. This would be all of humanity. All of humanity are God's children. When it comes to the way he loves the world and his views concerning mankind. What's the basic message of the parable of the sheep and goats? Who was on the left? The goats. Because they didn't do those things to people in need, and then they didn't do it to Jesus, obviously. What's the basic message of the parable? Well, the way we treat others is the way we would treat Christ. Kind of builds on what we were reading here in 1 John 4:20. The way we treat others is the way we would end up treating Jesus. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. Pretty heavy. There's no other word for it. We're not responsible for fixing all the ill around us, but we are responsible for doing what we can with what we have and when we can do it, you see. You have probably heard the story about the kid who was on the beach, and there was a whole bunch of jellyfish that had been washed up on the shore, and he was an older gentleman was walking the beach line. He was throwing the jellyfish. The young kid was throwing the jellyfish back into the water. And the old man was watching this scene, and the young man would pick up the jellyfish, throw it in the water, another jellyfish, throw it in the water. And the elderly man came over to the young man and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to save all the jellyfish." And the beach was just littered with all this jellyfish. The old man said, "There's no way you're going to make a difference." With that, the young kid picked up one of the jellyfish, threw it back in the water, and said, "Well, I made a difference to that one." And that's what Jesus is asking us to do, to make a difference where we can. We're not individually called to fix all the world's problems. We can't do that. But individually and collectively, God's children can make a massive, massive difference. By the way, this teaching is not about, this story is not about great achievements either, but the spirit in which the work is done. If you go to Matthew chapter 7, there's a group of people when Jesus comes back, and they're saying to him, "Lord, Lord, have we not done?" We'll read it here together, Matthew 7:22 and 23. Matthew 7:22 and 23, it says, "Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? In your name have we not cast out devils? And in thy name done many wonderful works?" So here are a bunch of people who've done a lot of good things. And Jesus says to them in verse 23, "Then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." So Jesus is not teaching salvation by doing good things for those in need. That's evident because of the surprise of the saved ones demonstrates that they loved not to earn merit or gain merit. They said, "When did we do those things? We don't know." Their left hand didn't know what their right hand was doing. Some folk are shaking their own hands for the good things that they do, but the encouragement is to not let your right hand know what your left hand does, and vice versa. Just do it because Jesus is asking you to do it, and be happy to do it. Jesus is teaching salvation. Jesus teaches salvation through faith, but a faith that works by love and purifies the soul. That's what we're talking about here. Let's move to Wednesday. We were on Tuesday, we're going to Wednesday, and let's talk about this sticky issue of loving your enemies. Loving your enemies. I want to tell you a quick story about an Iranian lady. Her name is Amina Barami. Amina Barami. And she lost her sight because she had suffered burns to her face, her scalp, and her body in an attack that was carried out by a man because he was mad. And the reason he was mad is because she refused to marry him. And she came from, where she comes from, she had the legal right for the victims to ask, or where she comes from, the victims have a legal right